The day you stop waiting for them to change, you get your life back. Carl Jung observed that what we cannot see in ourselves has a way of finding a face to wear in the people around us, and that face is usually the one we are angriest at, most disappointed in, most exhausted by waiting on the nerves. Here is the line I want you to sit with before anything else. Jung wrote in Ion, "When an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside, as fate, that is the whole of it, that is the quiet machinery behind every year you have spent hoping he would finally soften, hoping she would finally see it, hoping they would finally change. Jung would stop you right there and say, 'Do you see it? The situation you keep calling their problem is also, and maybe mostly, an inner situation of yours that has not yet been brought into the light, so it goes on happening to you from outside, dressed up as someone else's stubbornness, someone else's coldness, someone else's refusal to grow, and you call it their fault, and you are not wrong that they have a part, but you have handed them the whole play when you were only ever meant to own your seat in it, and that misallocation, that quiet handing over of your own unconscious material into someone else's hands, is the very thing keeping you stuck in the waiting room of your own life. So let me say the 3 things I am doing right now, in my own words. Before we go further, I stop waiting for the other person to change first. I turn the question back toward my own unlit rooms. I own the hook before I name the hand that set it. Say it with me. I make the unconscious conscious. Again, I make the unconscious conscious. Stanley. If this kind of teaching has been quietly rearranging things in you, consider staying close by subscribing, so that tomorrow's teaching finds you the way this one did. And if something in you just went very still while I said that about waiting, type the 2 words "face it" in the comments. Let it be your seal, not a performance for anyone, just a private mark that you heard it. The first key is this: the charge you feel toward them is real, and it is also information about you, not just about them. Jung taught that we do not manufacture projections out of nothing. There has to be what he called a hook, some real trait in the other person for the unconscious material to hang on. So no, you are not imagining that he interrupts you. You are not inventing that she never apologizes first. The hook is genuinely there, and I want to be very clear about that before we go any further, because this teaching is not an invitation to doubt your own eyes. It is an invitation to notice something your eyes alone cannot measure, and that something is proportion. Watch the size of your reaction against the size of the offense. That gap is where the real information lives. If a small habit in someone produces a disproportionate storm in you, rage that seems too large for the moment, contempt that lingers for days over a single sentence, a grudge you are still rehearsing a week later while folding laundry, that gap between the small hook and the enormous charge is the signature of something unconscious of your own attaching itself to them. Imagine a man stuck in traffic behind a driver, going exactly the speed limit, nothing illegal, nothing even rude, and yet he is gripping the wheel, muttering, feeling something close to fury. Ask him later and he will tell you it was about the other driver, but a 5-mile-an-hour difference does not manufacture that much heat on its own. Something else was already smoldering in him before he ever turned onto that road. Some old frustration about being slowed down, held back, made to wait on someone else's pace in 100 other rooms of his life, and the driver ahead simply gave it a place to land. Or imagine a woman who cannot stand her brother's laziness, truly cannot be in a room with it, and yet friends half her energy would call the brother merely relaxed. The extra charge she is carrying is not about him at all. It is about some permission she has never given herself to rest. Some old verdict in her that says stopping is shameful, and he is simply standing where that verdict can be seen. Notice that in both cases the world did not hand them an emotion out of nothing. The hook was there, the traffic, the laziness. But the amount of feeling poured onto that hook came from somewhere older, somewhere already stored. Waiting for a hook has always meant waiting for someone to stop reminding you of what you have exiled in yourself. So this week, before you measure them again, measure the size of your own reaction first. Ask quietly whether the storm matches the sky, or whether you brought weather from another season entirely. I own my reaction before I own my verdict. The second key is this. The waiting itself is the withdrawal you have not yet performed. And I want to slow down on that word withdrawal, because it is easy to mishear it as giving up, as resignation, as deciding the other person no longer matters. It is none of that. Withdrawal in Jung's sense is a very specific inner motion. It is the quiet act of taking back a piece of your own psychic material that you had stationed inside someone else's future, hoping it would grow there, hoping it would ripen into the change you needed, and discovering, year after year, that it cannot ripen there, because it was never planted in soil that belonged to it. Jung recalled a conversation with a Pueblo chief named Ochwe Biano, high above New Mexico, who told him plainly that the whites were always uneasy, always wanting something, always restless, and that the Pueblo believed the whites must be mad. And Jung wrote that in that moment, he saw for the first time the face of his own civilization from outside it, not through argument, but through the plain shock of being seen by someone who owed him no flattery. And he said, "We discover in our neighbor what we do not know about ourselves." Notice what did not happen in that story. The chief did not change. The whites did not change. Nothing about the outer arrangement of the world moved even slightly. And yet Jung came down from that mountain a different man, because something in him had been shown rather than argued into place. That is the whole shape of withdrawal. It rarely arrives through winning an argument or finally being agreed with. It arrives through being shown, sometimes gently, sometimes not. And most people spend years waiting for the other person to finally understand what they have been trying to say for a decade, waiting for the change that would prove they were right all along. But the day you get your life back is not the day they finally agree with you. It is the day you withdraw the enormous coil of expectation you had wrapped around their future behavior. And here is the part that is easy to miss. That coil did not sit neutral while it stayed in someone else's hands. It grew heavier with every year, the way a debt grows heavier with interest, so that what began as a reasonable hope in your 20s can calcify, by your 40s, into something closer to a grievance you check on daily, like a balance that only ever falls. And notice too how the checking becomes its own quiet habit. A phone glanced at for a text that never quite arrives. A doorway watched a half-second too long when a certain car pulls up. A sentence replayed at midnight for the 100th time, as though the 101st replaying might finally change its ending. That is not devotion. That is an unpaid account being visited again and again, in the hope that the visiting itself will collect the debt. Imagine a woman who has spent 15 years waiting for her mother to finally say the one sentence she needed as a child, some plain acknowledgement, some simple, "I see you," and imagine that every single visit home for 15 years has secretly carried that one small hope folded inside the suitcase, unspoken, and every single time the visit ends and the sentence has not come, something in her quietly deflates on the drive home, and she tells herself next time she will finally say it. And here is what withdrawal would actually look like for her. Not confronting her mother, not extracting the sentence by force, not even necessarily forgiving her, but simply, privately, admitting that the sentence may never come from that mouth, and that the part of her that has been waiting 15 years is not weak for having waited, only tired, and worthy now of finally being told the truth by someone, even if that someone has to be her. Withdrawal is that telling, quiet, undramatic, entirely internal, and it does not require the other person's permission or even their knowledge, which is precisely why it works when 15 years of hoping never did. I take back what I stationed in someone else's hands. The third key is this, and I want to walk you through an ordinary day so you can see the mechanism with your own eyes, rather than take my word for it. Imagine a Tuesday, 7 in the morning. You wake already rehearsing the argument you will not have, because he still has not changed. By 8, you are replaying the version where she finally admits she was wrong. By 10, at work, a colleague says something mildly careless, and you feel the whole day's weight land on that one sentence. Disproportion again. Remember the tell, the size of the reaction against the size of the offense. And here is what most people never stop to actually measure. If you add it up, Honestly, minute by minute, how much of that Tuesday was spent in the room you were physically standing in? And how much was spent in a courtroom inside your head, where the same absent defendant is tried again and again for the same old charge? The numbers would frighten you. An hour at breakfast that was never really about breakfast. 10 minutes at your desk that had nothing to do with the work in front of you. A whole commute home spent rehearsing a speech you will never deliver to a person who is not even in the car. By noon, you are telling a friend over lunch the same story you told her last month. Almost word for word, the same complaint, the same ending, and she nods kindly because she loves you. But notice, the story has not moved even though a month has passed. The plot is frozen, only the calendar keeps turning. By 2 in the afternoon, a small kindness from a stranger, someone holding a door, someone remembering your coffee order, lands with a warmth that seems oddly large. And that is worth noticing too, because the mirror does not only show you your wounds, sometimes it shows you, in a stranger's ordinary decency, exactly the tenderness you have been withholding from yourself. By 4 in the afternoon, you catch yourself checking a phone for a message that will not come. Not because you need the information, but because some part of you is still waiting to be finally understood, and you refresh it again, as if the 4th time might read differently than the first. By 7 at night, home again. The smallest domestic friction, a dish left out, a comment about dinner, detonates far past its size, and you go to bed having spent an entire day's psychic income on a transaction that was never going to clear. That is what waiting for someone to change actually costs. Not in one dramatic loss, but in 1,000 small withdrawals from an account you never noticed you were spending down. Jung wrote in Ion that projections change the world into the replica of one's own unknown face, and on a day like that Tuesday, the whole world outside you, colleague, friend, phone, dinner table, even the stranger at the door, becomes exactly that, a hall of mirrors, reflecting back an unfinished conversation you are actually having with yourself. The tragedy is not that they have not changed. The tragedy is that you spent the day meeting the same unknown face over and over and calling it by their name each time. Pause for a moment and pick one real hour from your own week, one ordinary hour, and ask honestly, was the size of what I felt in that hour actually matched to what happened in the room? Or was I somewhere else, in an older room, with an older face? The way out is not to demand the day go differently tomorrow. It is to notice, in real time, which moments were about them and which were about the mirror. And slowly, gently, the ledger starts to balance itself. Not because the world stops offering you small frictions, it always will, but because fewer and fewer of them get charged to an account that was never really theirs. I notice the mirror before I blame the glass. The 4th key is this, and here the lens has to turn, because up to now it has been easy to nod along about the colleague, the brother, the son, the phone that does not ring. But I want to ask you directly, whose face have you been waiting on? Name the actual person, not the category, the actual face. And now ask yourself honestly, whether the waiting has ever, even once, produced the change you were hoping for, or whether it has mainly produced more waiting, dressed in slightly different clothes each year. Jung was not gentle about this part. He said the meeting with oneself is, at first, the meeting with one's own shadow, and the person you are waiting on is very often standing exactly where your own shadow falls, which is why looking at them so directly reveals so little and costs you so much. This is not a comfortable turn, and I am not going to pretend it is, because it means the very energy you called devotion, called patience, called hope for them, may have been, in part, an elaborate way of not turning the lantern around, of keeping the light pointed outward so your own darkened rooms could stay unexamined a little longer, that is worth sitting with quietly rather than rushing past. I turn the lantern toward my own hand before I search theirs. Carl Jung, if he were speaking with you now by this fire rather than through a page, would not soften this, and he would not let you rush toward comfort before you had finished feeling the weight of it. So let me stay here a moment longer. If something in you just resisted that last line, that resistance is itself worth noticing, not fighting, just noticing, because resistance of that exact size and shape is usually pointing at exactly what needs to be seen. I want you to consider staying with this teaching a little longer, because tomorrow's video builds on this exact turn, and I would rather you not miss it. Subscribing simply means the next fire I light finds you too. The fifth key is this, and it has 3 parts, so let us take them slowly, one at a time, because this is the deepest room in the whole teaching, and I do not want to rush you through it. First, consider what Jung called the moral effort required to face this kind of material. He wrote in Ion that facing the shadow demands considerable moral effort, and withdrawing a projection from someone you have loved or resented for years is exactly that kind of effort. Not a clever realization you have once and then carry forever like a badge, but closer to an unglamorous, repeated act. The same small catching of yourself mid-story, the same small choosing to turn the question inward, again and again and again, long after it has stopped feeling insightful and started feeling merely tedious. Imagine a woman married 18 years who finally says out loud, in the quiet of her own reflection, "Maybe the coldness I keep accusing him of is also a coldness I have never let myself feel is mine." She does not say this to punish herself. She says it because it is finally, simply, true, and the moment she says it, something in the marriage does not instantly heal. Nothing dramatic happens at the dinner table that night, but something in her stops leaking. And here is what almost nobody tells you about that kind of moment. It does not stay. The old story creeps back within days, sometimes within hours. She catches herself blaming him again by Thursday, and the real moral effort is not the first admission. It is the 100th. It is noticing the old blame arriving like an uninvited guest and quietly showing it the door one more time, without despair at having to do it again. That patience with your own backsliding is itself part of the discipline. Jung was not describing a lightning bolt, he was describing a practice, and practice, like any practice, has plain unglamorous days in it. Imagine also a man who has finally seen, after months of turning the question inward, that his fury at his brother's carelessness is really an old fury at his own carelessness as a boy, a fury nobody let him feel safely back then. And imagine that seeing it once does almost nothing to stop the fury from returning the very next time his brother forgets to call. The seeing and the returning are not contradictions. They are simply what the moral effort looks like from the inside. 100 small returnings, not one triumphant departure. Second, consider the shape of a complex, because this explains why the moral effort feels so heavy some days and so light on others. Jung taught that complexes can have us rather than the other way around. A splinter of psyche with its own charge, its own memory, its own voice that speaks in the first person as though it were you. And the waiting you have done for someone to change is very often a complex speaking through you rather than you speaking at all. Picture a man whose father praised him only for winning, never for trying, and now, 30 years later, this man waits for his business partner to finally say well done without being asked. Waits, and when the words do not come, he feels a familiar collapse that is far too large for a missed compliment. That collapse is not really about the partner. It is the old complex, the never praised enough complex, taking the wheel exactly as it did at 11 years old, standing in a kitchen holding a report card nobody looked at. And here is the difficult part. In the moment it happens, it does not feel like an old complex at all. It feels like the truest, most present tense reaction you have ever had. That is precisely how a complex operates. It borrows the full authority of the ego so convincingly that you would swear under oath you chose this feeling freely. Picture also a woman who waits, month after month, for a friend to apologize first, after even the smallest disagreement. And notice how the waiting itself has a temperature to it. A stubborn folded arms quality that feels like principle but behaves like an old wound refusing to close. Some early year in which apologizing first meant losing, and losing meant being small, and being small meant being unsafe. That whole history can hide inside something as ordinary as refusing to text first, which is why willpower alone so rarely ends the waiting. You cannot simply decide to stop. because the deciding voice is sometimes the very thing that needs to be seen rather than obeyed. The way through is not more resolve, it is more consciousness, learning to feel the complex arrive, a certain heat behind the eyes, a certain tightening in the chest, a certain overfamiliar script starting up in the mind, and naming it the instant it takes the wheel, not fighting it, just naming it. That alone loosens its grip more than any amount of gritted teeth resolve ever could. And third, consider what I want to gently correct here, because this teaching gets misquoted constantly online, in a lovely blurred paraphrase that goes something like, "If you hate someone, you hate something in yourself that reminds you of them." People attribute that line to Jung endlessly, and it is not his, it is Hermann Hesse, a beautiful line, but Hesse's, not Jung's. Jung's actual claim is more precise and, I think, more useful. He said we discover in our neighbor what we do not know about ourselves. Discover, not simply hate, because sometimes what gets projected outward is not ugliness at all. Sometimes it is gold, a capacity you buried, an anger you never let yourself feel was legitimate, a softness you decided long ago was unsafe. Imagine envying a friend's ease at saying no to people, envying it almost to the point of resentment. That resentment is rarely really about her. It is closer to homesickness for a permission you once had and quietly surrendered. And notice how differently that reframes the whole waiting. You were not only waiting for someone to stop wounding you, in some quiet corner, you were also waiting for permission to become someone you already have every right to become. So when you finally stop waiting for someone to change, you are not only reclaiming disowned darkness, you may also be reclaiming disowned strength, gold you buried under years of convention, and calling it politeness. And here is a small practice worth doing this week. Take 5 quiet minutes, alone, with paper, and write down every irritation you have felt toward this particular person in the last month, not to build a case against them, but to ask of each entry, honestly, where else have I met this exact irritation? In myself, in my own history, in some earlier room. Call it an irritation inventory. And do not rush it. Some entries will open nothing at all, and 1 or 2 will open a door you did not expect, sometimes into an old wound, sometimes, unexpectedly, into a talent you forgot you were allowed to have. And when you find one of those doors, do not hurry past it toward a tidy conclusion. Sit with it a little longer than feels comfortable. Let it be unfinished for a day or 2 if it needs to be. That is the work, not confrontation, not demanding they finally see what you see. Simply sitting with your own list until it stops being only about them and returns, quietly, to you. I do the slow work of consciousness rather than the fast work of blame. The 6th key is this, and it is the gentlest one. So let it land softly. The day you stop waiting for them to change is not a day of anger toward them, and it is not a day of giving up on love. It is a day of a very particular kind of mercy, mercy toward yourself first, for having carried an assignment that was never fully yours to finish alone, and then, strangely, mercy toward them too, because a person who is no longer being waited on to perform your healing is, for the first time in a long while, free to simply be whoever they actually are, rather than the character your unconscious needed them to play. Imagine a woman who has spent 6 years waiting for her mother to finally say the one sentence she has been hungry for since childhood, some plain acknowledgement, some simple "I see you now," and imagine the ordinary Sunday phone call where, instead of listening for that sentence hidden inside every other sentence her mother says, she simply listens to her mother, tired, ordinary, imperfect, saying nothing remarkable at all, and something in her unclenches, not because the mother changed a single word of what she says, but because the daughter quietly closed an account she had kept open far too long. That unclenching is the mercy I mean. It does not announce itself with fireworks. It arrives like a held breath, finally let out in an empty kitchen. This does not mean every relationship survives that shift. Some do, changed and lighter, freed of the old assignment, and some do not. Some quietly end, or quietly thin, and that too is allowed to be true, without becoming a tragedy you narrate forever at dinner tables for years to come. The ending of a waiting is not the same thing as the ending of a bond. Sometimes it is the very thing that lets a bond breathe again for the first time. What does not change, whichever way it goes, is this one thing. The life you get back was never rented from them in the first place. It was never theirs to grant you. It was yours the whole time, sitting quietly under the waiting, like a coat you forgot you owned. And Jung would say, the tragedy was never that they withheld it. The tragedy was only that you forgot where you had put it down. So tonight, if there is one small gesture worth making, let it be this. Name silently the one thread you have been holding out toward someone, waiting for them to pick up their end. And simply, without drama, without announcement, feel what it is to hold it in your own two hands instead. That is the whole of the mercy. Nothing more is required of you tonight than that quiet reclaiming. I release the thread I mistook for a leash. Here is the whole picture. The hook is real, but the charge is yours to measure. Withdrawal, not their change, is the act that returns your life. The mirror shows up everywhere in an ordinary day if you are willing to notice it. The lantern only illuminates something when you finally turn it toward your own hand. The moral effort is slow and repeated, not a single insight. And complexes can run the meeting unless you catch them at the door. And the correction matters. Jung never said hate reveals only ugliness. He said the neighbor reveals what you do not know. Sometimes darkness, sometimes gold. And the last mercy is this. The day is not a verdict against anyone. It is simply the day the thread comes home to the hand that always held it. 6 keys, but really, only one recognition, wearing 6 faces. The unknown face was always going to be your own, and finding it was never punishment. It was the door. I stop waiting for the other to change first. I turn the question back toward my own unlit rooms. I own the hook before I name the hand that set it. I make the unconscious conscious. Again, I make the unconscious conscious. So here is the question. I will leave burning quietly by the fire with you. If the day you stop waiting for them to change is the day you get your life back, what exactly have you been paying them, all this time, to hold for you